We all know how important leadership is. And there is nobody in this country that displays greater leadership than Magda Wierzycka, the founder and CEO of Signia. We met up with her from her London office and she took us through her experiences of the COVID-19 lockdown. Right, we are joined today by one of my favorite people in the whole of South Africa, and that's Magda Wierzycka. Absolutely inspirational story. We were lucky enough to do an event with Magda a few years ago where we got Magda's life story, and it is compelling viewing to hear the story of Magda and how she came to South Africa as a child of immigrants and created an empire. Magda, welcome.
Thank you. Not quite an empire yet, but I'm working on it.
It's on its way. You deserve every success that comes your way. But Magda, the topic today, as you know, is leading in a crisis, and people are joining us because they just want to get some insights. It's been a really tough time for everybody. Whether you run a business or if you just work at a company, there's been a lot of uncertainty. There's been a mad response of shutting down economies. And obviously it's taken its toll on anybody who manages a business. Tell us about the COVID-19 crisis and your experience at Signia. How has it affected your business?
Look, I mean, obviously it made us put extraordinary disaster recovery plans together in 2 weeks. So it's amazing how resilient human nature and adaptable human nature is, given that I don't think anyone in terms of disaster recovery envisaged suddenly having to transport all of their staff to work from home, enable them to do so in a secure way, procure laptops for everybody, as opposed to allowing them to walk out of the office with PCs. But, it was a baptism of fire, I have to say, those 2 weeks. Obviously, once we set everyone up, it probably has been easier than one would have envisaged. So if you had asked me, 6 months ago, would it be possible to take your staff in, 4 different locations across South Africa, relocate them to a home environment and still make a business work? And, our business is financial services, essential services, it has to operate 24/7. I would have said, you're kidding. And yet, somehow we managed it in 2 weeks. And it talks to the resilience of human spirit, I think, which is a positive. On a negative side, obviously it has been a, huge disruption to the standard operating procedures. And some of that disruption will be positive, some of it will be negative. I think, it has enabled the mindset around offering our staff greater flexibility to work from home going forward. But, it also has highlighted the fact that, this pandemic has, and working from home has an impact on mental health. And so, it's not the answer. People like human contact. Businesses thrive on the back of innovation, innovative thinking, which often comes from people talking to each other and interacting with each other. And I think that kind of dies in this environment of Zoom meetings or, virtual meetings. Other than that, we're very fortunate in that, our business is not based on selling one particular product. It's has a revenue income to it. So we've been very fortunate to be able to, not have to retrench anybody. In fact, we're hiring, if anything else, because we continue to grow through this pandemic. But, on the human side of it, I think the disaster that has unfolded economically in South Africa, a disaster that we could ill afford even before this crisis, will be with us for many years to come. And I'm not sure that anyone has a comprehensive set of solutions in terms of how to get us out of this crisis.
Yeah.
So that will be the challenge.
It does seem that for once, I do understand that we've taken some really sort of crazy decisions, but surely the madness wasn't purely a South African thing. It's almost been a global response.
It has been a global response. And look, I did believe, and now I'm putting my economist hat on as opposed to the humanitarian politician social media hat on, because I think there was a lot of panic created by social media, and a lot of politicians responded to that panic. I always thought that potentially the economic cost is too high a price to pay in the absence of real information about, this virus and the real true, impact of this virus. And as we have learned in South Africa, it has been too high a cost to have paid. But unfortunately, politicians can only respond to what they know at that point in time. And, at that point in time, there was a lot of panic created around this virus. I don't think there was a lot of, level-headed thinking. There was a lot of reactive, panic-stricken thinking. So, in the South African context, you had to look at the overcrowding conditions in the townships. You had to look at, very immunosuppressed population between the levels of TB and HIV/AIDS, and the potential that this virus had to impact human life. And I guess the politicians worldwide just reactively responded to the information on hand right there and then. And hindsight is a 2020 science, of course. So with hindsight, of course, things should have been done differently. But I think at the point at which decisions were made, the bulk of the population, worldwide, and in particular politicians, thought this was the right response.
Yeah. But as we sort of move into the next phase, sadly, we can't unmake those decisions that were made. Let's go back to your experience at Signia. You went from being a totally office-bound business. In other words, nobody worked from home prior to this, and suddenly everybody's working at home. That must really, you mentioned it, it takes a toll on people. Mentally, it's quite hard. You're missing that social interaction. Firstly, what did you do with regards to communication with your team? Because I'd imagine that must be a lot more difficult.
Indeed. So, one of the very first things that we did is ensure that we started pushing out weekly emails to staff, particularly apart from obviously the daily emails around remembering the hygiene factors, etc., social distancing. But on a weekly basis, given that, it's almost impossible to structure and it's a technical thing. It was actually impossible to structure a webinar for our staff simply because of the way that they VPN into our systems, and they cannot VPN into an external internet. So according to my IT, we couldn't do it live. But we kept pushing out emails to staff, trying to be as positive and reassuring as we could be, with a particular focus on reassuring everyone that their jobs are safe. And communicating, at that stage, there was a lot of misinformation floating around. So we had a task team at Signia, which we put together, and we would compile. There was one person dedicated to compiling, as reliable information as possible from, for instance, Johns Hopkins Center, in order to try and bring down the panic feelings among people. Because, again, if you think back to March, April, it was, there were some doomsday scenarios being painted and some projected modelings of thousands of people dying, and, terrible scenes of, kind of emerging out of Iran, of what actually turned out to be standard mortuary scenes, which suddenly CNN was using as demonstration of COVID deaths, which, as it turns out, were just said deaths, but nothing to do with COVID. So, so I think there was an information upload. I think people were sitting at home and they were watching TV with these just numbers and statistics being shown at them. So we tried to distill through the noise, try to calm down everyone, and try to reassure everyone that their jobs are safe and that Signia is fine, and that, we will get through it. And I think that helped.
Yeah, there's certain also communication that has to happen at two other levels. In your case, it's a listed company, so you've got shareholders
Absolutely.
and
Clients.
stakeholders, and then most importantly, your
Absolutely.
clients.
Absolutely. So stakeholders, clients, that kind of became a business to business communication issue. So very quickly, within a few days, I think every single business in South Africa, whether they're a client of ours or not, was facing exactly the same issues. And so within a very short period of time, days, emails started flying, around business to business. How are you coping? What strategies have you put in place? Are our assets safe? And we literally kept asking the same questions of our clients. So I think that there was a huge, almost positive network effect among corporate South Africa in terms of that communication tier. And obviously we then started putting out notes to retail investors. So that's to our men in the street. We used social media a lot. So we engage a lot on platforms such as Twitter. We engage on Facebook and LinkedIn. And so we started using social media to also put out messages saying we're fine, we open for business. We on our website we actually had a crew come in and film individual staff members, and we put a whole website together of individuals smiling and waving with their contact details below. Right. So that if you're a client of Signia's, you went on our website because you're not certain of what's happening, you would be greeted by faces and telephone numbers. And hence you could immediately phone and ask questions if you were uncertain.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that there were no job losses. So I presume other than the working from home decision, which was kind of made for you, were there other hard decisions you needed to take at the time or still?
I guess the hard decisions started, we didn't, because once everything was put in place, I think everyone, operated from home and it was business as usual. We had to put in place, extra checks, extra balances, weekly meetings with all the heads of departments to make sure that if there are any bottlenecks in the system, we obviously had to put in place assistance programs for staff members, coming from underprivileged parts of, our society. So financial aid, making sure that they're safe. We put in place, we identified and we literally profiled every single staff member to identify who the vulnerable staff were. And, obviously those vulnerabilities come either from socioeconomic means. And here I'm talking about, it's as simple as our cleaning staff or our coffee ladies, where, we extended financial help to them. But also from people who might be living with, elderly relatives, and needed extra help and extra assistance. And, having literally profiled every staff member and to where the vulnerabilities lie, we are actually very well placed to, now that we started recalling some staff members back to the office, we know exactly who we can't recall. And hence we've put in place, kind of almost disaster plans around people who will be permitted to work from home on a permanent basis until such time as we have a reliable vaccine program in South Africa.
As they say, in a crisis, a team either pulls together or it pulls apart.
Indeed.
In your case?
I believe the team has come through in extraordinary manner. Look, you will always get certain people who flake out, who cannot cope with the stress of the crisis. But in our case, the team truly has pulled together to the extent that, financial year end is end of September. We have just gone through the allocation of bonuses and increases period. I think it's the record bonus that Signia will ever pay to its staff comes through this year. And we've also acknowledged and recognized staff members who have been extraordinary through this crisis. And each one of those staff members who have gone way and beyond has been paid an extra bonus, which we actually call the COVID-19 bonus, in recognition of the extra help that they extended towards the company and as a thank you for that.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm sure a lot of people watching this webinar today would be very envious. So do you think there's a chance that with the COVID-19 coronavirus situation, this bizarre situation we've had to live through, do you think it's created an opportunity for Signia?
I think we've created those opportunities, not necessarily, yes, in very specific areas, but we've created the opportunities for Signia over the past 14 years since our foundation. So, we've always premised our offering on low cost, top performance, low cost, lowest costs in South Africa. So in this kind of environment where, the economics and the economic fundamentals are so dire, we have seen, huge switch away from expensive providers to low-cost providers such as Signia. So our volumes, particularly individual investors, have quadrupled through this crisis, which is a positive other than, this is happening at exactly the wrong time when we have to make contingency plans around staff working from home. So it's not helpful that we have, 7,000 new business or new investor inquiries a month at the moment. And we have to hire people to cater for that at the same time as dealing with a pandemic. So some strains and stresses. So certainly, I think that has been an opportunity. I think the other thing has been this virtualization of meetings has meant that we've been able to reach a lot more investors than we normally could. So, just from my perspective, I would spend my time on the planes literally every single week, Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, London, Johannesburg, Cape. All of a sudden, actually base myself in one place and yet talk to the same investors and roomfuls of investors. And clients in a much more accessible manner. So that's an opportunity. We also completely inadvertently, and not because of the pandemic and not envisaging the pandemic, we did recognize healthcare provision as being one of the mega trends of the future alongside technology. And, a few years ago, we launched the Signia Fourth Industrial Revolution Global Equity Fund. Last year, we launched Signia Oxford Sciences Innovation Fund, which focuses on healthcare investments. And that was also followed by Signia Health Innovation Global Equity Fund. So not envisaging the pandemic, but envisaging healthcare provision as being a theme. We have inadvertently launched products which have completely benefited from this pandemic, which is but once again, I am not at all claiming that, we could have foreseen what was about to unfold. But we I think we're very fortunate to have some very innovative products which enable at the right time, which played up to this theme, which actually allowed us to raise a lot of money from investors. Again, we're incredibly grateful, and I don't take anything for granted in life ever. I think, you have to have a healthy dose of luck in life. And I think in this case, we have been extraordinarily lucky.
Well, Magda, you've set yourself up for those opportunities. I'm pretty sure that the management team at Zoom didn't see this pandemic coming and they also benefited. So I think as you go along, you can drop the inadvertently part of the story and just claim it.
No. I'm not. I am not that. What shall I say? Arrogant to do that.
So now, in the long term, do you see? You were, and it's once again, it's sort of something that strikes me now, and it's also a bit of good luck. The fact is, it seems to me that insurance companies, everybody revising rates down because people had a chance to think of the insurance, the premiums they were paying. Do you see a long-term benefit because of the fact that you were there as a low-cost passive fund tracker?
I think that the move away from actively managed funds to passive funds, started probably in United States in big volumes, probably around 8 years ago or so, after the global financial crisis. So it took the global financial crisis for people to actually say, what are we paying for in terms of, and now more than 50% of savings in the US is managed on a passive basis. Then the trend hit Europe. In a country like UK, it's around 30% of assets are now managed on a passive basis. South Africa is always a slow adopter. And, part of the reason is we've got few providers. It's a small pond. You have these established brands, which over the past 20 odd years have spent enormous amount of money on marketing, on billboards saying, we are the best, we are the best. Have you ever seen a billboard which says bottom performer? And yet performance is cyclical. So it takes something. It takes some kind of a confidence crisis to make people wake up and look around. And I think that, I managed my first passive fund in 1992 when I started my career. So I've always was a believer. Obviously, when we started building up Signia, that's what we premised Signia on. And I think this crisis has precipitated this awareness of fees, of costs, of passive investing, and certainly we're seeing an acceleration in the trend towards passive investing that probably wouldn't have been there was it not for this crisis. And I guess, the crisis also gave people an opportunity to sit at home, have a little bit more time on their hands and reconsider their savings, their investing, their long-term future, their financial well-being. And I think all of that has translated and has speeded up the adoption of index tracking and passive management in South Africa, and we're certainly seeing it in terms of inflows.
Yeah, I think at this point we've got to say for the people, because we've got a range of people watching this, and by passive investing, index tracking, what we're talking about is not necessarily looking for one or two stocks that are going to be doing really well. You kind of invest across the board. Am I correct?
We buy the market. We buy the entire market. But you can buy the market in different ways. You can invest in the top 40 stocks. You can invest in listed property stocks. You can invest in bonds. You can invest offshore in MSCI World Index Tracking Index. So you can track the entire world. You can invest in Europe. You can invest in Japan. So the themes are endless and iterations are endless. So they actually do allow you to construct, kind of interesting strategies if that's what you want to do, or to invest on a kind of holistic basis in the entire market at a very, very low cost. So, the cost is
investing in groups of things.
Agreed, in baskets of shares.
Kind of commonality. Do you, looking more at the sort of broader economy, do you see behavioral change for people as a result of this past year? Or do you think once we open up, we'll go back to the way they were and they'll never make another loaf of bread again?
No, I think that, this crisis has hit, so take away all the macroeconomic jargon and, we can boil down economic health, global economic health into two words: consumer spending. And I think that, so underpinning everything that you hear about is consumer spending. And I think that this crisis has hit exactly that. It has changed. It has made people a lot more cautious. It has changed what we spend money on and how much we spend money on. It has made people reconsider what they truly need in life, just because there is a healthy dose of fear factor and uncertainty associated with this crisis. And, the moment you start hitting consumer spending and consumer behavior, then those kind of trends become irreversible almost. And I think that, so for instance, online shopping, once you've started what seemed inconceivable before, suddenly becomes the norm. Are you honestly going to go back to throwing yourself into a shopping mall on a Saturday and, rubbing shoulders with thousands of other people, or queuing in a shopping queue if you don't have to? You've got things such as I think it'll, I think certain things will bounce back, but I think that it will take a while. So I think, any kind of a sporting event, any kind of a, event where you have to be gathered together in large groups, I think people will be a lot more cautious about that, going forward. And again, I don't think that that's going to just bounce back. I think that, right now you might be sitting there and saying, okay, if there's a rugby game, I'm going. But I think when faced with the prospect of sitting in a stadium shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other people, you might kind of say, actually, you know what, DSTV will do for now. Let's see how this unfolds. So I think there's a lot of kind of bravery in terms of the way people talk about what they will do, but I think the fear factor is there, and I think it will be with us for a while.
So given the fact that you've got quite a high profile, especially in social media, Signia has become well known. Do you think it makes your job easier or more difficult?
I think social media has become a very powerful communication tool, and particularly in this, age of the pandemic again, where I think our attention spans have vastly reduced in terms of, wanting to hear news and wanting to distill news. And literally it has, attention spans, some told by marketing, are around 2 minutes in terms of a video clip, and probably around 100 words in terms of written communication. And, given that, and again, I think that's a shift that has been happening, but this pandemic has accelerated it because, people were in constant search of news flow and constant updates. So social media has become a very, very powerful tool for messaging and for advertising. And we actually had a strategic debate at Signia of basically saying, given that as much as we've been around for 14 years, we're still a new kid on the block relative to Coronation, Alan Gray's, Investec, 91s of this world. And, when I started at Coronation, it was a startup then, the Coronation Fund Managers, the way to get through to your audience used to be TV advertising, radio advertising, billboards. And that is how those brands built themselves into brands. Given where we are now, with Signia trying to reach the man in the street, what's the point of billboards if people don't drive to work? What is the point of TV when people are watching streaming services? Again, radio people usually listen to in the car. So social media has become the advertising tool of choice, and it has served us very, very well. From a personal perspective, I think it has, and it's a personal thing. So now I'm not speaking as Signia CEO, but in my personal capacity, it gives me the opportunity of expressing views, and some of them are controversial. And, I never say that all my views are correct. They are observations. Some of them are critiques. Some of them hopefully trigger exposés of some of the corruption that I see going on, both in the private and public sector. But, I do know that my social media account, particularly my Twitter account, is followed by lots of different people, lots of politicians, government departments, and lots of journalists. So if something that I say resonates with any one of those entities, and I have seen evidence that it has, then, I feel good about making a contribution. So I see my social media account as an opportunity to make a contribution to a debate, and it should always be a debate. And, to be perfectly honest, I would like to see more business leaders in corporate South Africa engaging in this manner. Very few do. Some of our politicians do. Tito Mboweni is great, particularly when it comes to chicken and garlic recipes. But, I really would like to see more corporate South Africa, one, find its voice, and to communicate their points of view across. Because you actually don't hear from business leaders that much. You sometimes see an article, there is usually an AGM, annual general meeting, at which, they speak out, but very seldom do you hear an opinion. And I think that now, given where South Africa is and the problems we are facing, we need to engage in conversations and debates. We need to bring the smartest people that we have in South Africa, and there are lots of them, around the table to try and discuss solutions in a kind of collective manner, because there is a huge amount of cohesive goodwill right now. Well, there was a lot more before we heard about all the COVID-19 related corruption. So there was a lot more goodwill towards doing things collectively, but I still believe that goodwill towards South Africa exists. We have 59 million people in the country who have nowhere to go.
Yep.
And we don't want a failed state. And yet we're bankrupt. So we need creative solutions, and we need smart people sitting around the table debating these things and, agreeing and disagreeing and coming up with collective strategies. So, if some of my social media tweeting and engagements offends some people, if some criminals are offended in particular, and I can name a few, some own newspapers, so be it.
Now, do you think, because it feels to me that with the problems we've seen with the COVID-related PPE tenders, it feels to me like this may feel a little bit, if not the final straw, but certainly one of the last straws. Do you think you might see South African business leaders becoming a little bit more emboldened?
No, unfortunately not. Unfortunately, the truth of the matter is a lot of South African corporates rely on government business. And as I've been repeatedly told, that's why I don't participate in business forums or business organizations. I do not like to be part of a collective where we all collectively agree to say things in a certain way. I want the freedom to say things the way I see them. But as I've been told before, and by some very senior business figures, I've been told that I'm naive because, business is business. Business will adapt to where the wind blows. So if, business needs to do business with government, and if that means that you pay bribes where bribes need to be paid, then you will do so. And if you're living in an environment where that is not tolerated, then you won't do it. And, I'm not even talking about South African corporates, because, the main culprits in the corruption that we have seen in South Africa, let's forget the COVID-19 tenders, because I think that's, that is a special. But the big corruption that we have seen in South Africa has come from large multinational firms. It's your SAP, it's your Bain, it's your McKinsey's of this world. It's KPMG's of this world. It's multinational firms that HSBC's, Bank of Baroda's, and so on. South China Rail. Almost every country has sent us, a corporate which was willing to pay to do business with South African government. And they've contributed to destroying South Africa. And what is so disheartening is the fact that there have been no consequences to those companies in their countries of origin. Absolutely none. So whenever I see a developed country preaching to South Africa on corruption, I always want to preach back on corruption. Do I think, look, the COVID-19 environment worldwide created an opportunity to benefit. Our tenderpreneurs took it at a high cost, extracting a very high cost. But I always like to think that, the wheel comes around. These people actually have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, I stole from the poorest in society. I think some of them will be brought to book. If not legally, they will be named and shamed. And, being named and shamed in your community, where you're then looking at people who look at you and say, you stole from us, has its own price attached to it. So even if, some of the kind of consequences might not be apparent in terms of people being dragged, in handcuffs into courts of law, I do believe that whoever has enriched themselves at the expense of this COVID-19 crisis has to live with themselves and to answer to their communities and to their families in particular. But do I believe that business will behave differently to the way it has always behaved around the world? No.
Well, Magda, all we can do is wish you more strength for your fight. You're a very brave person, braver than most of the people I know. And that's why there's so many people that love you, and there's also so many people that
hate me.
we're glad to see the back of you. I'm very happy to always bring you back and hear from you. One last question, the social media profile of yours. I know somebody else that grew a social media profile and eventually took over a whole country. Is it true that you're going to be acting in or not acting, presenting a television program, or was that just a rumor?
I think, that it was an idea that producers had, and they probably kind of rushed to market a little bit too soon for my liking. Look, I think it would have been fun if it wasn't for the pandemic. I'm not convinced in my heart of hearts, and I always kind of like to go with my gut feel that it's the right thing for the right time. That this is the best way that I can make a meaningful contribution to trying to solve South Africa's problems. And I think there's some constraints around filming. So obviously you're referring to The Apprentice. I think there's some very real constraints around filming and the way these programs are run, which is also a consideration. But I think it's a little bit of a frivolity, which I'm not sure that is appropriate for the times. I think, I can dedicate my time to something more meaningful in terms of making a social contribution in South Africa.
Well, Magda, you've definitely made a contribution to our Leading in a Crisis webinar today. I really would love to thank you for your time. You've been very generous joining us from London. Magda Wierzycka, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to hear from you again soon. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolute pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you.